Great. Thank you, Lauren. Sounds like some of you have doubled your LinkedIn contacts already tonight. One person that doesn't need any more LinkedIn contacts is our guest tonight, Marina Go. Can just welcome, firstly, Marina, and welcome everybody here tonight for especially braving some of the wet weather. We're going to get straight into it. The person with me tonight doesn't need much introduction, but I'm going to give an introduction anyway. What we have here is that one of the youngest editors of Dolly Magazine at the age of 23. Marina then went to become the editor of Elle Magazine. She then moved from publishing roles to more management and leadership roles, becoming the CEO of Private Media and the general manager of Bauer Media, which looks after brands such as Cosmopolitan and Harper's Bazaar. These days, her roles extend to being chair of the West Tigers NRL club. I know there's a West Tigers fan over there, actually. Chair of office brands, directorships across a number of corporations, including Energy Australia, Auto Sports Group, 7-Eleven and others. You mentor women. You're often invited to speak as a keynote speaker. And just to add to that list, you've also raised 2 boys. I should mention, with the help of your husband, Graham, who's over there tonight as well. And in your spare time, you've written a book. Now, I'm already exhausted doing that summary of your life. So I think my first question is, when do you sleep?
I don't have a lot of sleep, actually. But when I sleep really heavily. So my husband will tell you I'm like a log, so nothing wakes me up.
How many hours?
How many hours? 7 probably on average, I'd say. Yeah.
Okay, not bad. I'm going to start off with some sort of quick questions and answers then. Introvert or extrovert?
Well, this is controversial because I've done Myers-Briggs, and Myers-Briggs tells me that I am one tiny little slight extrovert, so I'm an E, but only slightly, so almost on the line, and that maybe because of the job that I've had, maybe I was an introvert who became an extrovert. But to the question, which apparently is the question as to how you know, if you're at a conference, work conference, and after it everyone goes out drinking, and you've got a choice of doing that or going back to your hotel room, I always go back to my hotel room. And apparently the people who go back to the hotel room to be alone, they're introverts. So I think I'm naturally an introvert, but my role has made me more extroverted.
Okay, I thought people went out partying afterwards and then back to the hotel room. Not alone, though. What website do you visit most often?
What website? God, well, I don't know if you call it a website. All of my media basically comes through Twitter, and so I visit the websites that have news that I access via Twitter. So it's probably a long way of saying that every day I primarily look at the AFR and probably the Sydney Morning Herald in terms of the news websites. But I also look at Net-a-Porter too much. So my husband will always say to me, "What are you looking at?" And he'll come around and I'm scrolling through clothes. I don't always buy them, but I really like to look at. That's my enjoyment. I like just to look at the clothes on Net-a-Porter.
Okay, they're a bit more expensive than the clothes on the Iconic, I think.
A little bit.
Most famous person you've met?
Oh, that's I've actually met a lot of famous people because I used to be a journalist, and most famous person I've met. So maybe it's my perspective of the most exciting famous person I've met, because I've met Tom Cruise, right? So he's pretty famous, but I met Uma Thurman, who that was really exciting for me because she was I was a bit of a fan of Uma Thurman, but as I said, I met Susie Quattro. I've met a lot of celebrities, mainly because I was a journalist first. And when you get to edit a magazine like Dolly or like Elle, there are a lot of celebrities around at any given time.
Okay. What are you currently watching on Netflix?
Not really watching anything, although I've still got the last season of House of Cards because I love it. But I think that's probably it. I've got a lot of recommendations, that I haven't started yet because I haven't really had the time. to be honest with you.
Yeah. Okay. What do you want to be remembered for?
I think I'd like to be remembered for helping other women succeed. So I hope that's what people remember me for, and because it's what I enjoy doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. And what would you say you're naturally good at, or better than most people at?
I think I'm a good planner, and I've kind of planned my whole career. So I think I'm a good planner, but I think I'm also good at. I'm always focused on the outcome, so rather than the process, I'm much more interested in the outcome, and so I think I'm good at identifying what a preferred outcome would look like for an organisation or even a project, and then helping the person who's running that project or business, so the CEO or the project manager, work out how to get there. But I'm much more kind of forward-looking, if that helps, which is why I'm good at planning.
Okay,
Yeah.
a bit more strategic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you've been known to plan lunches and dinners with your friends months in advance.
I have.
Okay. I noticed reading somewhere you're also really good at talent spotting. Now, talent spotting to me probably means something different to what it means to you. What do you mean by that?
Well, I have given first jobs, straight out of school, straight out of uni, to people who've gone on to become, industry leaders. So I think that's kind of what I mean by it. I've been able to identify people with potential who are, relatively young and inexperienced, who I think could become, could go on to lead and do really great things in their career.
Okay. So, I mean, what do you look for? How can you tell?
I guess it depends on what the role is. Depends on everything's different. But I'll give you an example. So there's a fantastically talented, successful woman living in the UK called Jo Elvin, and she's the editor of. Well, she was until early this year the editor of UK Glamour, and she launched Glamour in the UK. And Jo, when I was the editor of Dolly, Jo came to us as a work experience student. She just finished school and she was in first year of her media degree, and she was doing work experience with us. And I just saw something in her that I think it was. I thought she had a really great ability to see things from other people's perspective and really broad mass market appeal. And that's what we needed in magazine publishing. So to be a really good editor, you need to actually be able to understand what your audience wants. It's not what you want, it's what they want. And she was the person on my team, even though she wasn't really on my team at that point, who really understood that. Because when she wrote articles, she actually got it from the reader's point of view. So I offered her a job, and she ended up throwing in her degree, which her mother was not happy with me about. But anyway, she absolutely went on to become an editor at a very young age, and she moved to London, and she's been offered jobs in New York, and she's really, really successful. And I think it was just seeing her. It wasn't even about her writing style; it was just about how she saw the world. So I think it's how people view the world depending on the job. And if that helps you anyway.
Yep.
It's not very specific, but.
Okay.
It's not relevant.
I know
That's
this
not
story.
relevant to this.
I think I know this story. It's in the book.
Yeah, it's in the book.
There's a story that one of your juniors was coming back with coffee, and
Yep.
the unwritten rule was you don't enter lift 4 in the building because that's Kerry Packer's lift.
Yeah.
And she didn't look.
Yep. So it was Jo's turn to get coffee that day because we always took turns in getting coffee, and she didn't remember the rule, obviously, and she was probably tired, and she had all these coffees, and a lift door opened. She didn't look up, and this hand came and pushed her out, and she, flung her out of the lift, and coffee all over her, and it was Kerry Packer, and it was Jo, and she was just horrified. She thought she'd get sacked, and I think at that point she was actually a work experience person, so I don't know why she thought she'd get sacked. But I wrote the story really about Kerry Packer rather than about Joe. But they were in the early days, and even after all of that, she accepted the job with me. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
She was determined.
She was determined.
And so you also mention Kerry Packer in your book a few times. You don't talk about him extensively, but how would you describe Kerry Packer?
Well, I only wrote about him a few times because even though I was an editor, I didn't actually have a lot of contact with him. So that's why I wrote about the times when I did. Everyone was really scared of him, so I think he was a bully sort of character, kind of old style authoritarian ruler, and it was his company, and so I guess he could do that. And that was back in the day before anyone, HR was really looking at workplace practices. So yeah, he was a bully, and he took great delight in scaring people, which I just thought at the time was just horrendous, considering that we made money for him, and he took great delight in scaring us, which is just not okay, right? So.
Okay. I always believe that we're a product of our environment. So I want to go back a little bit to your childhood and how, I guess, your parents and how you were raised influenced who you are today. So you have an interesting upbringing because your father lived in Hong Kong. He's of Chinese background, and he met your mum here in Australia in a hospital. They were both working in a hospital. Your mum was a blonde Italian girl. Which, in terms of a mixed couple, wasn't very common in those days. Did they experience much rejection, racism, difficulty?
Yeah, they did. So that was in the early 60s, and it was quite a racist environment back then, more so than now. So I think, anyway, maybe not more so than now, but it was rare. So they didn't know any other mixed race couple apart from friends of theirs that they'd introduced. So Mum had introduced one of her Australian girlfriends to one of Dad's Chinese friends, and that was it. And so they did experience a bit of racist abuse, which my dad kind of fought back against and all that. It didn't scare him, but made him really angry. But my mum was also a bit nervous about introducing my dad to her mother, because she was worried that her mother would have a problem with the fact that she was dating a Chinese man. And of course, my grandmother was not at all racist, and so she thought it was wonderful. She loved the fact that he was Chinese, because she actually thought that because he was Chinese, he'd be a good person, and that he wouldn't just want to have sex with her or anything like that. That he'd actually be an upstanding young man and marry her and all that kind of stuff, which he did. But I think, as I was telling you, Brad, it was my dad's family that were racist against my mother. So some of you might understand that, right? So my dad's family did not want him to marry a Western woman, and so there was a bit of years, I think in the early years, where they almost cut him off, and then once children were born, then everything was okay, because they want their grandchildren, but they were very unhappy.
Okay, and I should just make a mention that we are using Slido, which is an opportunity to put forward questions. In fact, we have a book. I'm still in the middle of this book, but we have another book to give out. And what we might do is we'll give out the book to the person that has the best question. So, Marina, you can keep an eye on the question on what you feel might be the best question, and you can we'll get you to sign the book. And get a selfie with the person. So that's important.
Okay.
We'll keep going. So, and I should mention, I have a lot of questions. So I'm really only going to go to these if they're high quality questions. So not to be rude, but try and make them good questions. I'll keep going for the moment. So just in terms of your parents, so they got married. You have an older brother and a younger sister. So you're a middle child. They had 3 kids in less than 30 months, so they didn't muck about.
No, my mother was a Catholic girl, and so literally she was just unfortunately constantly pregnant.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like your mum was probably a devout Catholic. She
She
grew,
was.
but your father was a Buddhist.
Yep.
Okay, that would have been a little bit confusing.
For us, do you mean?
Yeah.
Not really. I think we were not raised deeply religious. So mum went to a Catholic convent. So she was at boarding school from the age of 4, and it was literally a convent. They're like Brides of Christ, you know, the show Brides of Christ. And I think because of that, she saw some negativity around religion. So she really deeply believes in God. She prays all the time. Like, she really does. But she also she was also very unhappy with the fact that there was a period in my grandmother's life when she struggled a little bit, and my grandmother used to give a lot of money to the church because she was really religious. That's why my mother went to a convent, and Italian Catholics. But when my grandmother experienced hardship, the church didn't help her, and so it really upset Mum. So we were not raised. We were raised as Catholics. We were all baptised, but we didn't go to church every Sunday. She didn't do that to us, and so my parents both believe in their religion, but they didn't impose it on us to that same degree. I guess it's not something we talked about at home. We have, we literally have Jesus next to Buddha at home, though. In my mum's house, it's very funny, and everywhere there's Jesus pictures and everything, and there's also Buddha. So it's all combined. And my mother, my dad will talk about Saint Anthony. My mother talks about Buddha. So, and reincarnation. So they're mixed up. They're confused, but it wasn't a problem for us growing up because we weren't religious.
Okay, and growing up, you had a relatively traditional family where your older brother probably got to miss out on a lot of the household chores because he was seen as, the person that traditionally wouldn't have to do that role. And you used to argue with your mum about that. So you started at an early age advocating for equality for women.
Yeah, I did. So I can still see it. My mum taught my sister and I. She said, "Oh, I'm going to have to teach you to, do ironing and things like that." And I remember that my sister and I, once a week, started with the handkerchiefs, and we started ironing small things, and it really upset me that my brother didn't have to do it. And so I would always argue with my mum and say it's not fair. And she used to say, "But your brother, he's a boy, and one day he's going to have to look after the family. So he has to rest now, right?" So, I was like 6 years old and he's 7, and he's allowed to rest on the ironing handkerchiefs. But what made it worse was that this particular time, and again, we were really quite young, and my brother walked through the kitchen into the lounge room and sat down and said, "Mum, can you get me a drink?" Which is what he used to do. And my mother, being Italian and over kind of, boys are everything, she said to me, I was already sitting in the lounge, she said, "Marina, can you get him a drink?" And I said, "No, he can get his own drink." And, and she said, "Oh, you'll never get a husband." She was really upset. And so my younger sister went and got him a drink. And I was just furious about it. And I think that fueled my kind of desire for equality. Because I never, ever, ever could accept that it was okay for me to do work and not my brother, housework. And also that, I used to say, "But I'm going to go to work one day too. I'm going to do all this." And Mum would say, No, you're going to get married and you're going to have children and, you'll find a husband who will look after you. And I go, "No, but I want to go to work." So, but my sister, she was younger and she was much more compliant with my mother. So, I think she kind of accepted back then. I mean, she does work and she does, she does do all the things now. But when she was little, she accepted. So I refused to get my brother a drink. I refused to do anything for my brother, but my sister would do it. Anyway.
Okay. So interesting childhood, and we get the sense of what you were like growing up. So pretty determined. And like you say, pretty focused. And so I think at the age of 16, one day you were sitting on your bed reading Dolly Magazine, and you made a decision that one day you would become the editor of that magazine. Now, when I was 16, I wanted to be on Home and Away, but I never made it to Summer Bay. So what did you do that I didn't do?
Look, I often think it's just, maybe I just didn't even know what I didn't know, right? So I didn't even assume that it wasn't possible. I really loved reading Dolly, and I remember at the time the editor of Dolly was Lisa Wilkinson, who you would all know, and Lisa wrote an editor's letter, and she used to write about all the great things that she did as the editor of Dolly, and I just thought, what a fantastic life she has. I'd like to be the editor of Dolly. And I was good. It was, one of my best subjects, and I didn't even comprehend that it would mean journalism. I just wanted to be the editor of Dolly. So I just thought, I'm going to have to make this happen. So I wrote a letter to Lisa, and I got a letter back, but probably her assistant wrote it, and I said, I want to be the editor of Dolly. How do I do that? And I got a letter back saying, if you want to be an editor, you have to first become a journalist, and you have to, then you've got to get a cadetship. And I remember reading this and thinking, oh God, I have to do that. All right. So that's what I did. I eventually got myself an cadetship at my local newspaper, and I worked for free first of all there until they gave me a cadetship. I think they probably thought, if we don't give her this, she's never going to go away anyway. And then once I got some experience, I went to work at News Limited in the city for the Daily Mirror, which is where I met my husband, because he's also a journalist. And then while I was there, I started just telling everybody, because I talk a lot about what I want. I started telling everybody that worked on the paper that I love magazines. I wanted to be the editor of Dolly Magazine. And one day, my boss, who was this fantastic woman, Jenny Gilbert, tapped me on the shoulder and said, I've been told that they're looking for an editor for Dolly Magazine, and I think you should apply. And so I applied. I didn't actually get it. I got down to the last two, and I was really disappointed. They took the internal candidate, but they rang me 2 days later and said, would you be interested in joining as the health and beauty editor and deputy editor? And I said, I would have joined if they said, will you make the coffee? Because I wanted to get to Dolly. So I said, yep. So I went across, and luckily for me, again, right place, right time, the editor was English, and 6 months after I joined, she went home to the UK, and they made me the editor of Dolly. So it wasn't a direct route. It was kind of, like that. Yep.
Yeah, okay. But it was the goal from the start.
Yep.
And you talk about right place at the right time. The other right place at the right time was when you were a journalist. And I should mention this because he is here. It's where you met Graham.
Yes.
You actually wrote, from the moment you saw him, you knew he was the one for you. Wow, how romantic. Is that true?
It is true. It is actually true. Yeah. When I'd actually been overseas, travelling. I'd finished university and I went overseas for about almost 4 months, and I obviously finished working at the paper. And then when I came back, I thought, well, I need to get a full-time job now. I walked into the Daily Mirror and I spoke to the editor, and he said, yep, you can come back, we'll give you a full-time job. You'll be sitting over there. And where they pointed was this tall, dark and handsome man. And so I thought, oh, okay, great. So I was sitting next to him. and that, yeah.
Okay.
That's what happened.
Yeah. And it's probably fair to say it took him a little bit longer to realise that, because he went to work in London, sort of as the romance started to blossom as well. But
that's right.
Yeah, I'll move on from there. I might go to one of the questions actually. So since you're very good at planning, who plans more about the things in life between yourself and your husband? Because it's a partnership, right? You can't do it all on yourself. And you actually write in your book, there's a chapter about having the right partner. How does that work with both of you?
I think I'm probably more anxious about things maybe than Graham, but I think we plan together, but there are some things that I'm better at and some things that he's better at, and that's kind of how we do it. and I think probably the right answer is we plan things together when it comes to life things. But it's probably fair to say that I'm much more strategic. I'm probably more for, looking ahead further. And also maybe more impulsive. And so Graham is much more calm and considered, which is good for me, because it means that sometimes I might go, we're going to do this, we're going to do it now. And he will kind of slow that down a little bit appropriately. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah. He pulls the reins back a little bit. Sometimes he saves me from myself, because I like to do things quickly, and if I've got an idea and I go, right, I'm just going to do that, I'm just going to do it. And it's not always the right thing. Does that answer the question if you ever asked that question? Yeah. Okay.
I'm happy with it. So you talk about planning, but some things you can't plan. And I guess you didn't necessarily plan to be pregnant when you were 28 because you were so career focused, but you were pregnant. You were in the sort of middle of living the life as the editor of Dolly and going to parties and everything else.
Yeah.
That was a bit of a spanner in the works.
Yes.
So what did that mean?
Well, I fell pregnant on my honeymoon, and when we got married, of course we talked about having children, but I think we thought we'd probably, travel a lot and, just kind of enjoy what we were doing. And I loved my job as editor of Dolly. And I was only 28, or 27 actually, when I fell pregnant, 28 when I had Jackson, our oldest son, on my 28th birthday. It meant that as the editor of Dolly, I used to go out most nights of the week, because there was always an event. There was always a celebrity in town. There was always an impromptu party. There was something. And we used to all go. So there was only 13 of us in the team, and we'd just all go. And of course, when you're pregnant, but also when you have a baby, you can't do that. I just couldn't do that anymore. So it meant that I had to give up that job, which was the hardest thing in the world, but I had to give up that job. And because actually it was unfair to Dolly, to actually the product, if there was an editor who couldn't actually go off and do all these things, because it was really important to the spirit of the team, and the stories we would get out of it, and just the contacts that I made through networking and going into all these events. And I just, every time you go out, you got a glass of wine. I couldn't do that when I was pregnant. So, yeah, it was really hard. It was really hard.
Sure. And I think you talk about it was a difficult birth. And Jackson, your little one, was crying nonstop for 18 months. So it wasn't easy. And when you think about when you're in that moment, you're pregnant or you've just had a baby and you don't know if you can handle it, what advice do you give now to women who are in the middle of their careers and faced, with that choice of family or not, and probably nervous about their careers as a result of how will it affect my career? What's your advice to them?
Well, I think there's never a good time to have a baby. I think that's one thing that you learn. And so I always am grateful for the fact that it happened that way, even though at the time it was really confronting and, I was worried about my career. It didn't affect my career in a negative way. I mean, it did initially, because I definitely was discriminated against initially. It was, 25 years ago that I had Jackson, 25 years ago actually on Friday. And so I definitely took a step back in my career when I came back from maternity leave, because the organisation back at in that 25 years ago, discriminating against someone who had a baby it wasn't as problematic as it is today. But it didn't affect me in the long term. And I have these two beautiful children. And, I work with I have worked with and, continue to work with a lot of women who were terrified of that and just never had children, or left it so late that it became too late. And I really feel sad for them, because a lot of them wanted to have children. So I wouldn't want anyone to hold back, but I also wouldn't want you to be scared or to give in to the fact that it might stop your career. And that's where my comment around having the right partner matters, because Graham and I made a decision that he knew I wanted to go back. He probably knew that I would be unbearable to live with if I didn't. And so Graham changed his work hours and the role he did within the company. So went from being a reporter to being a sub-editor because it worked better for us with a baby for me to be able to go back to work. And then we were also lucky that both, my parents and Graham's parents could help in terms of babysitting. So you need really strong support, but I think the most important support is your partner, because you need your partner to understand it's an equal partnership, and so we share. We still share the work at load at home. I don't do all the housework. In fact, Graham does a lot of it, and that's really important. So that enabled me to go back to work. It was still hard. Of course, it's hard. You work all day and you come home and there are babies that won't sleep, but it's a short period of time and you get through it. And I wrote that stuff in my book, and that's one of the main reasons I wrote my book was actually for young women who are career focused, who think that it's the end of the world when they are pregnant, or that they have a little hiccup with their career because they've had a baby, or they have children that won't sleep and they feel like they can't work and it's unfair to everybody if they do everything. Because I wanted to show that I went through all of that. It was not easy. It was really, in fact, it was, I had times where I thought I'm going to lose my mind. But we got through it. Our boys are happy and healthy and really doing well in their own chosen areas of their careers now. Boys are 25 and 21. And everyone's happy. No one, there's no kind of docs coming after me because I was a bad mum because I wasn't there all the time. So, I think you have to. I always prioritise the boys, regardless.
Great, and sounds like Graham has been a good catch for you as well.
Say so.
There's a question.
Yeah.
There's a question about the glass ceiling for women, and does it exist? And I think the answer is yes, and for migrant women, and I think the answer is still yes. I want to focus a little bit more on how important it is, however, to be able to be assertive. Okay, because when I look at you, I gather you can be assertive. When I look at Di in the front here, she can be assertive.
Yeah.
How important is it to be able to be assertive? And secondly, what advice would you give to maybe others that are more naturally introverted and timid?
It's really important to speak up. You have to be able to speak up, and you can't. Yeah, and you have to be independent of thought, but also you have to speak your mind. If you don't agree with something, or you have a point of view that you really feel like you need to get across, you have to be able to speak up, because if you don't, then actually people don't respect you if you don't. And I've always been assertive, and I don't know, maybe it was just kind of the environment I found myself in, arguing the case from a young age around gender and equality, but. Yeah, look, I don't know how else to explain it except to say that you do yourself a disservice if you thinking that you should say something and you don't, and you might think, oh, people will look at me and judge me harshly, but there is respect that comes from that. You don't have to be aggressive though. So there's a difference between assertive and aggressive, and I always try to be assertive rather than aggressive. But even around a board table, if there is always that, you hear those stories about women making a comment or stating an idea, and no one says anything, and then 3 men later, the same guy, a guy will say something, same idea that you just said, and everyone goes, "What a great idea!" I always say, "You do realise I just said that 10 minutes ago, so I will say that." Right? And then people go, "Oh my God, of course you did, sorry," because I just feel like you have to do that, right? You actually have to stand up for yourself, because otherwise other people won't. And one of the reasons why it's important to have more than one woman on a board is that generally we will say it for each other, because it's always better, of course, if you're not the person that says that. So if that happens to me now on the 7-Eleven board, for example, there's one other woman on the board. Sandra will say, "Oh, hang on a minute, Marina just said that," and I'll do the same for her. And it really does make a difference. But we're both assertive women, and we both feel comfortable speaking up. So if you don't feel comfortable being assertive, it's one of the, if there's any kind of personal development you could do for yourself, that's it. That's what I'd say to you. That's my recommendation. Do that more than getting into PhD or whatever. Go and do some assertiveness training.
Okay, let's go to I guess your sort of next life as a non-executive director. So again, this was planned out. So you realised that you wanted to join corporate boards, and you thought, well, I probably need to, before that, become a CEO in some companies. You also did an MBA over a number of years. So you strategically planned and manoeuvred yourselves to give yourself opportunities to get board roles.
Yeah, I know I sound like a nutter, don't I? I always think when you say it like that. Yeah, I did. So it was 2003. I had just finished my MBA, and because it was after I finished my MBA that I decided I wanted to be a director one day. And there was, because there were so few women with MBAs back then, there was a networking group called Women with MBAs, right, which you would laugh about now in your generation because there's so many. There were not a lot of us, and I got invited to join this group. And I went along to a networking session at IAG. And you may have heard of a director called Sam Mostyn. She's the chair of Citibank, and she's on other boards. And Sam at the time was the head of people and culture at IAG, and she was speaking to us that night. And she talked about the need to have more women on boards, and she talked about the inequality of numbers and how it was really unfair. And of course, this appealed to my sense of injustice to do with gender. And so I thought, right, I'm going to be one of those women who gets on boards to help even up those numbers. So that was the reason I wanted to be on a board in the first place. And then, of course, once I've decided that, then I've got to try and make it happen. So I went off and did the Australian Institute of Company Directors course, and then I registered for Women on Boards, and then I was approached to join a board, and then I was approached to join another board, and alongside this, I was still an executive. So at this point, I was only 40 maybe. No, it was earlier than that, 2003. 38 maybe. So I wasn't ready to be a director. And then I started thinking about, because none of those, in the early days, boards were not paid primarily. It was mainly not-for-profit boards. And then I thought, maybe I could one day make a career of this when I'm ready to move away from an executive role. So I always had in my mind 55. So when you think that I was 38 planning for 55, that probably tells you how crazy my planning is, but that's what I was looking at. And then I thought, well, okay, if I'm really serious about this, I need to get experience. So I made sure that for the rest of my executive career, which was another 12 years, basically, that I would always be on a board of some description. So I was on a lot of, as I said, not-for-profit boards. But it was really when I got onto sports boards that I started to really learn about governance. And it was while I was an executive that I got approached about joining the board of the West Tigers, which is a rugby league club. And then as soon as I joined the board, they appointed me chair. So I did that for 2 years while I was still an executive. And then I decided it was time. I think I fell out of love with my executive career. And it's the best decision I ever made.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to maybe ask some harder questions now because you're finding these pretty easy. You spoke earlier about the importance of speaking up, of being able to voice what's important to you. Yep. In the recent couple of years, we've had the Me Too movement. You have had your own experience of being sexually harassed in the workplace. Yep. You haven't named this person, but what you ended up doing was quitting a job that you loved as a result of that sexual harassment. Yep. What has stopped you from
naming the person?
Yeah, and sort of walking the talk as well.
Well, there is that, because obviously obviously I know what happened to me, but But you need to take into consideration, obviously, the situation. And look, and you know, when I look back, so it was years ago. I was in my late 30s, early 40s, I think, at the time, and I, yeah, look, I was strong enough to deal with. So it was harassment. It was just basically constant suggestion, and it was highly inappropriate. But you know, I'm quite a strong person, so I dealt with it. I left the board because it was a board issue, because, you know, for a whole range of reasons. But it was just, this person was just not somebody I wanted to be on the board with, and it hasn't affected me in a scarring way. So, you know, I know that there are some of the women who've come forward in the Me Too movement have been horribly scarred, and some of them have been, you know, physically abused. I wasn't physically abused, so there's some of them were physically abused, and it's really scarred them, and it has affected their career. So this didn't affect my career, except that obviously I moved away from a board that I actually wanted. I wanted to join, and on paper was a great board, but the fact of the matter is, you know, I spent a couple of years on that board, and I learnt everything that I could learn, and then I left that board and I went onto another board. So, I guess in weighing up whether or not you name somebody, I think you need to think about whether, you know, what the impact of that's going to be for you personally, but also on this person. And I knew that it wouldn't affect that person in terms of their career or anything like that, because, you know, this person's incredibly wealthy and has a whole protection around them and isn't reliant on a job or anything like that. So they were not going to lose anything, honestly. They were not going to lose anything. But I would have been caught up in a whole, and I actually think it would affect my board career, to be honest with you. And that was a real consideration for me, because even though people say, you know, culturally we wouldn't want this happening in our organisation, I also think that there would be some men who'd think, oh, you know, if I look at her the wrong way, would it be uncomfortable? What if I was, you know, alone in a room with her? Would she accuse me of? So, which is unfortunately some of the stuff that happened. So I made the decision to, because I wrote a piece about it for Women's Agenda, which is how you know about it. So I wrote about it, but I didn't feel the need to name the person. I just wanted to talk about the experience. And actually one of the main reasons I wrote about it was because I don't think everybody has to reveal. I think it's personal. And I do think that, you know, all the women that have come forward, I think fantastic, good on them. It's helped them. It's actually been like therapy. It doesn't. I don't need the therapy because I'm not troubled by it, and I also don't feel like there's been anything to gain from it, from my personal experience. Yeah.
Okay.
That's
good answer for a pretty tough question. I'm glad I'm asking the questions.
Yep.
Let's go to something a little bit maybe easier. I'll go to the screen again. Is there anything in your career you regret and wish you did differently?
I'm a bit of a no regrets person. God, is there anything that I regret and wish I'd done differently? Oh, there's probably one thing actually. There is one time in my career where I was fired from a job, and it was, you know, it was public in terms of, because you're in the media, and I was in a senior role. And it's the reason why I was fired that I think I would probably change in hindsight, which is unfortunate because, you know, you trust your organisation, you trust your HR department. And so what had happened is there was a very senior man in our company, and who was in charge of, he was one of my bosses. And he'd taken a whole bunch of the sales team out for dinner one night, and and there was an inappropriate event that happened and involving him and the sales assistant. And the next day, one of the senior men who was there at that event came to me and said, "Oh my God, you'll never guess what happened last night." And I was the kind of the only senior woman in that team, but I wasn't in the sales team, so I didn't go to this event. And he was telling me what happened to this young girl, and she was traumatised, and she ended up resigning and leaving the company because she was only about 18, I think. And because it was reported to me, I had to say something. So I went to HR and I said to them, I don't know what to do with this, but this young woman's traumatised, and I've got to do something about it, or you have to do something about it. And they said, okay, what we want you to do is we want you to write it down. And I said, oh yeah, but that person will bully me then, because I'll be, he'll know. And they go, no, he will never know. But we need this written down in order to have a conversation with him and have a conversation with her. And so of course I trusted them. I wrote it down, and they gave it directly to him. And then after I had actually successfully completed a transaction where we had to enter into this I had to actually win a piece of business for this company that we thought it was important to win this piece of business. Ended up winning this piece of business, and the CEO was really excited about it. And so and after I'd completed that, so he obviously waited for me to finish that project. He actually rang me, and even though he was in the office, not 3 offices up, and said, I want to have a chat with you. Can you meet me in the coffee shop downstairs? And I thought, he'd be so excited because I've just won this piece of business. And as I walked out my door, one of the guys said to me, where are you going? And I said, I'm going off to have a coffee with the name of the guy. And they went, oh my God, he's going to sack you. And I said, what are you talking about? Don't be ridiculous. And they go, that's what he does. He invites people out for coffee. And I said, yeah, but I've just won this piece of business. Anyway, I went downstairs and he said, you're no longer required, I'm restructuring. And so we're going to make your position redundant. And I said, but I don't know how I've just won this piece of business. I'll have to run it because the client has given us the business because of me, and because I built a relationship with the client. And he said, no, I'll be taking it over now, and basically closed his folder. And then he said, I can't believe what you wrote. So I knew it was about that. And so when I look back, I think it's the only thing in my career, I think it's made me realise that you can't really trust, which is terrible. I know those of you who are from HR, I was obviously given bad advice. And actually, after that happened, I actually rang the HR department and said, hang on a minute, what's happened? And they wouldn't take my call. So it's the only thing I regret. So I think you just have to be, you have to be careful and know that, unfortunately, you can't trust everybody in your own company to protect you, even if you act on the advice that they give you. It's the only thing that, you're on your own usually. Well, I don't know. I mean, I probably would have said, well, I did ask 3 times, are you sure that this is not going to come back to bite me? And they said, oh, yes, we would never let that happen. Oh, yes, we would never. I don't know how I could have done it, to be honest with you. I mean, I did have to report it. You can't have a situation where, maybe, but but they still might have told him that. No, I don't know. I still think that you have to report it. Someone has to do that. Someone has to stand up, and I had to do that. But maybe what I should have got from them in writing that there wouldn't be any blowback, or maybe I should just gone to see a lawyer. Actually, I just accepted it and moved on. But maybe I should have actually gone to see a lawyer, because I probably could have. But then, who wants to be working for a company like that? Culturally, right? So,
exactly. Yeah. Tough one. And I don't think you could have done realistically anything different.
No, probably not. No.
But yeah, my take on that is don't trust HR.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, those of you from HR. I know that it's from someone from HR.
Let's go to your role with the West Tigers. I'm a huge West Tigers fan, in case you ever have free tickets. So you've always had a pretty public career, but becoming chair of the West Tigers has even elevated your public profile, but also the ease with which people can throw stones at you. Why did you decide to accept that kind of role?
Well, I have to tell you, I didn't want to accept it. So I, leading into the board meeting, I was hearing that there was a lot of, jockeying going on behind the scenes and kind of people shoring up votes. And then when I realised it was because they wanted me to be the chair, I was thinking, oh God, I don't want to be the chair. But then even in the board meeting when they said, we want you to be the chair, and I just went, oh God, I think I was the only person who didn't really want to be the chair. But then I realised that, it's so rare that a woman gets asked to be the chair of anything, let alone a football club. And so given the fact that, if Di came to me, and Di and I obviously speak a lot about these things, if Di came to me and said, someone's offered me the role of chair, I don't feel like I can do it, I would talk her into doing it and I'd make her do it, right? So I had to take my own advice. I had to kind of look myself in the mirror and think, unfortunately you would tell someone else to do this, so you have to walk the talk. So I agreed to do it. I didn't have any chair experience at that point, so I was really nervous, but thankfully I had a director on my board who had chaired a number of boards, and I said to him, I'll do it if you promise to give me really honest feedback after every board meeting and tell me how I could have improved it, which he did for 6 months. And then after 6 months, he said to me, you got this, you're on your own. Obviously, I was not on my own, he was still there. But that's the only way I could do it because I was a bit nervous about it.
Yeah, okay. And it hasn't been easy. I mean, you've been on the back page of newspapers, you've had Alan Jones call for your sacking. Yeah. There's been headlines, go, must go. And it affects you, and you've got a thick skin, but it also affects your family, your boys, and one's a West Tigers fan as well.
Yeah. So, I'd always, when it first happened, of course, my husband and my youngest son in particular, because my oldest son unfortunately is a Roosters fan, and we don't talk about him. But the youngest one is a West Tigers fan, and my husband is a West Tigers fan, and. Of course, they were really excited that I would be the chair of their club because, they suddenly gained access to this world that they'd only dreamt about in terms of, when you love your club, you love your club. But, Graham and I had this agreement that I would stop doing it if it negatively impacted the boys and particularly our youngest son, because he was at school at the time. And by that I meant I knew that at some point the papers would write negative stuff about me. I just knew it. Even before it happened, I thought, I'm a woman. I've joined the world of rugby league. They blokes won't want me hanging around. I haven't played football. All that sort of stuff, which is exactly how it panned out. And so my major consideration during that time was the impact on our youngest son, and it was around that. You mentioned the "Go Must Go" headline and Alan Jones. So. It was at that moment, which was in, was it 2016? Our youngest son was watching Fox Sports, one of those shows one night, and I think he and I were the only two at home. And I was in the kitchen, and he yelled out, "Mum, you're on the back page of the Telegraph tomorrow." And so I ran out, and they were holding up the Telegraph, and they were talking about me on television, and it had a photo of me and a photo of Alan Jones, and the headline said "Go Must Go." And I looked at Lockie and I just started laughing, and then he started laughing, and so I said to him, "Are you okay with that?" And he said, "Yep, I'm okay because you're okay." So then I thought, well, we're going to be okay. And for me that was the test. So he, we talk about it, we still talk about it, because sometimes he'll read forum, not very nice things are written about his mum. But we talk about it, and he's okay about that. Of course he doesn't like to read things, and so I just say to him, just don't read them, just stay out of it, don't read them. I think if I was distressed by it, I think it would distress him, but it doesn't bother me, and so because it doesn't bother me, I think we're okay. Graham gets most upset, actually. Graham's probably more upset than anyone because, I think it would. I think if it was the same, if it was they were writing horrible things about Graham, obviously I would be more upset because you don't want to see things like that written about your partner. but it never ever upsets me because I know it's not true. So I think if it was true, I'd be thinking, oh my God, I'm a crappy chairman. I don't know anything. What am I doing here? All that sort of stuff. But because I know that none of that is true, we actually are doing great things behind the scenes, my board and I.
Yep.
We just ignore it.
Okay, and I think that's the importance of having resilience and those other sort of attributes. When we caught up a couple of weeks ago for a coffee, your phone kept ringing, and it was journalists wanting a story. And at the time, it was in the media every day about the coach of the West Tigers and whether he was going to leave or not. I was actually asking Marina some questions. I was actually fishing just for some inside information. She didn't tell me anything. She said, when's the talk? By then I can probably talk about some stuff. But so you get journalists calling you all the time, and there's always a risk of either saying the wrong thing or being misrepresented by journalists. How do you manage those risks?
Well, I've worked out really quickly which journalists I can trust, and by that I mean which ones are actually not going to misrepresent me. And there's not that many, so there's about 3 that I speak to, and mainly it's background. So they'll ring me and they'll say, look, I want to ring you about the coach, for example, and I'll say to them, I'm not giving interviews. You can't quote me, and they'll say, okay, that's fine, but can you background me? So they'll ask me some questions. I can't give them everything because obviously there's stuff that is sensitive and I don't want them even anonymously to have written about it. But I will, they'll ask me questions, and it's more about them writing an accurate article. So we have a good relationship, these 3, because they know that I don't want them to write an inaccurate article. So they might say to me, someone told me this. And I might say, well, I can't tell you the detail of it, but that's factually incorrect. And so they won't write it because they trust me. And so I think it's about building trust with a few journalists. So, on the day when we were sitting there, of the journalists that rang me, I think 2 of them were people I would never speak to. And when they ring me, they leave a message, I immediately put their name in my phone so I know not to answer that call. Because they have misrepresented me before. So if they do it to me once, they're dead to me, and they know that. So it's about building relationships, and they're trusted relationships with a few people. And it matters also because if you do want to speak on the record, and there are times when I have wanted to, then I ring them, and I know that they'll write a factual article, they'll quote me accurately, and they won't twist the facts. And that really matters when you're trying to get, the truth out there.
Okay. Let me ask one more question about the West Tigers. Okay. I'm pretty sure there are no journalists in the room, so hopefully you can speak openly and honestly. But at the time, the West Tigers earlier this year hired a coach, Ivan Cleary, who came on and, everyone raved, including yourself, about how good a fit he was for the club and how he changed the culture of the organisation. But, by 2 months ago, that opinion had changed. Why? What had happened?
Well, he still was the right, we don't regret appointing him to be our coach. So was it beginning of last year, I think it was, he joined our club, and he talked to us. I spent 3 hours with him before we we announced the appointment, and he talked about the culture, how the culture of the club was really important, and wanting to help build the culture and values, and wanting to build a premiership winning club, and all the things that we obviously wanted to hear, and we hadn't really had that before. So we thought we shared the same values and we wanted the same outcome, so we gave him the role. Now at the time, as I've said publicly and on television, what he didn't say, which if he'd said we may have talked differently to him, maybe, was he didn't say to us, I'd like to coach my son as well one day. Right. Now, he just didn't say that to us at the interview or at any time before he was appointed. But he did start saying it this year. And he kept saying it and saying it and saying it. And at the time, I was a bit anxious actually when he first started saying it. And I had a conversation with our CEO and I said, we've got his son plays number 7 and we've got a number 7. And how must he be feeling? And he said, oh, yeah, look, I'll have a chat with him. He goes, but, it's really great because his son is like the best young talent in the rugby league and it wouldn't be great if we got him. So we were going, yeah, that's right. So we said to him, you're in charge of your own list, and if you want to bring him to the club, then, we've got space in our salary cap. You can make that happen. So when he was talking about it, we thought he was going to bring him to us because that's what he said. What changed, which was actually out of his control, to be fair, is his son, who is 21 and, has his own mind, said, well, I want to stay with my mates and try and win a premiership with them here at Penrith, which is where I've been playing, and they gave him our first start. So his son was loyal to his own club, which is fair enough. Unfortunately, his dad had in his mind that he wanted to coach his son, and that clearly became the most important thing in his life. And so as a result, he couldn't let that go. And that was really what changed. And so we knew then that at some point we would lose him to them. We thought at the time it would be at the end of his contract, which is in two more years. But it quickly became evident that, it was not a great situation for our club to have a coach who had publicly said, I want to be somewhere else, even if it was in the future, and who, because his son was playing at that other club, was often seen mixing with that other club. It became a problem. And, when you are running something like a rugby league club, the most important people in your world are the fans. The fans started to really turn on him. And I think when we realised that was happening, that's when the board decided that we really need to take this seriously and we needed to start looking at an alternate solution. And so that's what we did. We actually had 2 coaches approach us, so we didn't actually go and approach anyone. So Wayne Bennett and Michael Maguire approached us. Justin, our CEO, interviewed them both. And we decided that Michael Maguire was the best fit for us and the timing, and so we appointed him and released our coach. So, there's no real mystery to it, and it, to us it makes sense. To the rugby league community, they want answers every single day, and we couldn't give them to them because we were doing our negotiations behind the scenes. But that's actually what happened, and that's the reason my phone was ringing constantly, because we were not talking about it publicly.
Yep. Yeah, well, I think it was a good choice, and I look forward to next season. We've only got time for a couple more questions. I might again go to the screen, and so you talk extensively about the importance of networking and the ability to network well and to build a network. But if you, again, could give advice to a young person in their career about what is something they should focus on to help them succeed in their career, would you say it's networking? Would you say it's something else?
Yeah, networking is really important. Networking and, obviously having a mentor which helps you personally, but maybe most importantly is getting a sponsor in your company. And I don't know if you know the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. So a mentor is somebody who is almost like a coach and will talk to you about some of the challenges you have and give you confidence and give you thoughts around how you could manage a situation differently. But a sponsor is someone in the organisation who is really senior, who almost takes you under their wing and will talk you up within the company. So I had that when I was at ACP as the editor of Dolly Magazine. I was very lucky that the first person I think I would identify as my sponsor was a man who I then worked for a couple of times in my career. In fact, he was the first person who ever gave me a publishing role, so moved me across the management side. And when I was the editor of Dolly, he was the general manager of ACP. And Dolly at the time, we had a lot of brand extensions. So we had, Dolly Video, Dolly Club, Dolly Books, all sorts of things that we would sell to our readers. And he ran all of that. He ran all the licensing for Australian Consolidated Press. And so I had a lot to do with him, and I used to meet with him probably once a month. And he thought that I was a really commercial editor. And a lot of editors, So a lot of journalists don't like to do the advertising money side, and I always liked that part of it. I liked that part of the business, and so he saw that when I was relatively young. So I was 23 actually, and he took me under his wing, and he used to talk me up within the business. And then when he left, it coincided with when I was pregnant, and I came back, obviously, and I had a pretty negative experience when I came back from maternity leave to ACP. And by then he was the CEO of another publishing company, and he rang me and said, I want you to come over here. So I went over there and I worked for him for a little while, and then I went off and launched a magazine somewhere. But then later on he basically gave me a really big job in the company as, group publisher of the women's magazines, from being the editor of Elle. And so I think having people like that in your corner is the most important thing.
Okay, so you never had Kerry Packer as your sponsor then?
No.
No, I don't think
no,
anyone
but Lisa
did.
Wilkinson did.
Oh, okay.
Right? So, when she was the editor of Clio, he was her sponsor. I mean, he brought her into the company, and I know that he helped her career a lot.
Yep.
So, it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't have to be the CEO, but it does need to be somebody more senior than you, and you need to make sure it's somebody who has influence in the company.
Yep, and I know in your post-executive career you've had people like Graham Bradley who are sort of well-known in those sort of governance board roles who have advocated for you, and that's helped you open doors. Yeah. Okay. Quickly, what's more pressing, gender diversity or cultural diversity?
I think they're both really pressing. Well, I mainly work in the gender diversity space, but we're not there yet. So, for me personally, it's still a gender push, but certainly boards. And I don't know about companies, and you might know better in terms of organisations and people coming through, but there's not a lot of cultural diversity on boards. The most culturally diverse board that I'm on is 7-Eleven. And there are 7 of us, and 2 of us come from non-Anglo backgrounds, which is really great out of 7. And the reason that the board decided to do that was a really important strategic business reason, and that is that 80% of our franchisees come from non-Anglo backgrounds, and they previously weren't represented, or they didn't feel that the organisation represented them. And we go to all the conferences, and now they see that there are people that look like them on the board, so it kind of gives them a bit of confidence. But it's a little bit like saying, I've got a daughter, and so now I care about gender diversity. So I don't think you should have to care about cultural diversity just because you suddenly see somebody who's a supplier or a customer that might have an Asian background or some other background. It's just you should care because it's the majority of your customers. Or certain background, and another or a certain background, and you should look at it from that point of view. And so, I think in the boards that I'm on, we do have discussions around cultural diversity. I don't think anyone knows what to do about it in a kind of strategic way of looking at it, but I don't think that any is less pressing than the other. I think they're both important. I don't know if that helps you. Okay. I wouldn't like to say one's more important than the other. I think they're both important.
Okay, great. Now, unfortunately, we're out of time here. It's been a great conversation. I've been accused in the past in my interviews of trying to get a bit emotional with the person I'm interviewing and making them cry, but I haven't been successful.
Nobody makes me cry.
No, well, I thought that, yeah.
Well, my children can.
But look, really appreciate your time, really appreciate your honesty. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We actually have some feedback forms if you can fill that out before you finish up tonight. I've learnt a lot tonight. I've learnt the importance of planning for my career. Even where I am now, I've decided I'm going to become a social media star. So we're going to take a selfie straight after this. But can everyone please just give a round of applause for Marina. Thank you. Actually, before I forget, we have the
I wish we could speak the truth. I wish we could start over. I wish we could